Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Word on the Street Live, J Street's regular weekly conversation with the folks who are making news and making policy and making politics around Israel, Palestine, and the Middle East. And it is quite a week for Elon and I to be getting together. This has been just a amazing emotional roller coaster over the course of the last week, and we saw a hostage release. We saw an end to the at least the formal fighting, and it's just been an amazing time, Elon.
Yeah, no, I mean, and after 2 years of this, I think much faster move from a proposal to a deal than any of us expected. I think we talked about it last week, but for the first time in 2 years, things actually felt like they moved in a positive direction much more quickly than we expected. That's a refreshing change.
Exactly. So we are really excited to be joined this week by Congressman Adam Smith. He represents Washington's ninth congressional district, and he's been serving in Congress now for about 30 years, and that allows him to become the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee for the Democratic Party. He's chaired the committee in the past. Obviously, that role puts him in a central spot in terms of determining American policy as it relates to not only arms and other issues related to Israel, but really the making of American foreign policy generally. And so we're really excited to have Congressman Smith with us today. We're going to touch on a range of different topics. But Elon, why don't you get us started in a little bit about the ceasefire and the next steps?
Sure, sir. Congressman, thanks for joining us and really looking forward to this conversation. Maybe let's just start with probably a softball you were expecting coming on here, which is, what is your reaction to a ceasefire in Gaza after 2 years, and hopefully what is the beginning, the end of the end of the war, and what are you watching now?
It's good news. I mean, that's the dominant reaction. I mean, you saw the 20 living hostages returned in the last couple of days, and obviously the emotional reaction from the families, the incredible sense of relief. And in Gaza, a ceasefire, a stop to the bombardment, a chance to rebuild. I mean, the human suffering that has occurred in Gaza over the course of the last 2 years is extensive, as we all know. And the suffering in Israel also. After October 7th, the rockets that were coming from Hezbollah, the war with Iran, never knowing what was going to come next. Number one, biggest thing, it's a huge relief and a positive step. Now, the next step is the key and very difficult. And I think, Thomas Friedman had a pretty good column, I think it was this morning, saying there's cause for concern because there's going to be actual work involved in the next step, because the next step is building an alternative to Hamas that can effectively govern Gaza. It is also connected to the West Bank, as we can get into later in this conversation. And what are those steps happening? Where are those Palestinian alternatives to Hamas? We don't see them. We don't see Netanyahu certainly working with them. We don't see the Arab states yet presenting them and beginning the process of fixing that. So, I mean, the key going forward is a couple of simple things. One, Hamas has to be kept down and out. The United States and the Arab world have to be in and actively engaged. The roles will differ depending on the specific actor, but they all need to be really involved in making sure that we build towards a sustainable peace. And the Netanyahu government has to do something that Benjamin Netanyahu has never done in his entire life, and certainly hasn't done in the last 16 years, and that is willingly work with a group of Palestinians to help them get to the point where they can govern. He has systematically weakened all potential alternatives to Hamas over the course of his prime ministership. That has to change. And none of those things that I just mentioned at this particular moment are actually happening. Doesn't mean they won't, but it does, give cause for concern.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think part of this, and as you started talking about Congressman, and I'm interested in Congress's role in this because, it feels like the administration, for a lot of mistakes and a lot of problems we have with them on so many things, and I know I'm sure you do many. I know we here at J Street have many problems with the Trump administration and some of the things they've pursued. At least for this first part of the deal, him throwing his weight around, throwing some threats around on something pretty simple, being a bit of a bully, actually seemed to make a difference. But the question now is you have a lot of diplomacy to come, a lot of detail work to come, not exactly the thing this administration has shown itself to be strong at. So, from the congressional perspective, how do you try to hold them accountable? How do you try to push them in the right direction on this?
Well, we need to talk about it, and we need to be very vocal about taking those next steps that I just laid out. There's not a particular funding role for us in the short term, but something I think we also need to be prepared to do is put more pressure on the Israeli government. And don't misunderstand me. I understand that Hamas started this war, and I understand that they drove it. And a lot of the people who were continually, attacking Israel along the way gave Hamas the space to continue the conflict further than they should have. But going forward, the ball is very much in Israel's court in terms of driving this peace process. And what Trump really did that was different is he successfully put pressure on Netanyahu because he had the credibility with Netanyahu to do that. I'm not buying into this idea that Trump's tough talk is what changed everything. I saw this cartoon about how, Obama wanted to negotiate, Biden wanted to negotiate, Hamas wanted to blow stuff up, and then Trump came in and said, well, I'll blow stuff up, and they wanted to negotiate. That's not actually what happened. I mean, certainly under Biden, we're blowing plenty of stuff up, okay? I mean, 2 years of brutal war in Gaza. The notion that somehow, we weren't pressing hard enough is just frankly absurd. What changed is that Trump went to Netanyahu and said, this has got to end. And to give Trump the credit there, he had the credibility on that front, the relationship with Netanyahu that Biden didn't have, that could deliver that result. But let's not, blow this into some miracle that Trump did. I was hearing people say, nobody thought this would ever happen. Well, that's just ridiculous. I mean, how many people thought that Israel's war in Gaza would last forever? Okay, nobody. It was going to end. It should have ended a lot sooner than it did. So I'm a little more cautious about, erecting statues to Donald Trump over this. He did some good things, not arguing with that, but I worry that a lot of this, over the top rhetoric is just going to make it easier for him to disappear now and not follow through on the steps necessary to actually get a lasting peace. People have gotten ceasefires before. Donald Trump's not the first president to get a ceasefire. Question is, will it last?
Well, it seems, Jeremy, like a good transition over to you and the U.S.-Israel relationship and how it goes from here.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Congressman. You have been watching this and had a front row seat in the engagement of the U.S.-Israel relationship now for quite some time. And for much of my time in Washington, and as long as I've been engaged, the principle of American support for Israel has pretty much been, a blank check and hands off. And we have given what was asked. We have hopefully given what was needed. But I think that the nature of that relationship is changed by these last couple of years. And I'm curious your take, having been an observer of this for quite some time now. You came out, I think, in just August with, for the first time, a statement on your behalf that there was a need for some form of conditioning of the arms transfers that we were making to Israel. And that was a first for you. But across the board in the Democratic Party, I think that probably that switch has been flipped and we're not going back. So I'm curious what your take is on the impact of all of this on the broader U.S.-Israel relationship going forward.
Without question, the support for Israel in the United States has dropped to probably its lowest point in the history of Israel. There is no question that change has happened. It's certainly been more pronounced on the Democratic side, but you've seen some of it even from the Republican side. Just the toll of this war and Israel's approach to it, the 3 months when they cut off all humanitarian assistance from March to June or whatever it was. I think that really pushed people to not be as supportive of Israel. Now, I think it's important to restate why we are supportive of Israel, and a couple of things that people have sort of minimized is, number one, Israel is under threat and has been under threat as a nation in a way that, well, prior to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, no other nation in the world has been under threat. They are the only nation where their enemies say they don't have a right to exist. I mean, there's a lot of conflicts. I mean, Yemen and Saudi Arabia fought for a while, but Yemen never said Saudi Arabia shouldn't exist as a country. And Israel has faced that pressure from the day they were founded in 1948. Now, the players have changed. Some of the countries have moved and made peace. Different organizations have formed and fallen apart. But there has always consistently been a group of people who have been wanting to extinguish Israel as a nation. And that really hasn't changed. They have a right to their sovereignty. So our defense of them mattered. The second thing is, who were these people who were trying to get rid of Israel? Well, there were a variety of different folks, but leading the charge was Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, a group of religious fanatics who, if they gained greater power in the Middle East, would wreak havoc on peace and stability and any what I think should be basic human principle. And we've seen it. We've seen what they've done in Lebanon. We've seen what they contributed to in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Iran, for that matter. So, supporting Israel to help blunt those religious fanatics was definitely within the best interests of the U.S. Now, the way Prime Minister Netanyahu took that in the last 2 years, and continued to push the war past the point where it was militarily defensible, as I think undermined a lot of the confidence. But also, I think part of what also has undermined the confidence is ignorance about those first two facts. I think a lot of people who've grown up aren't really thinking in terms of the pressure that Israel has faced during their entire 77 years now of existence, or just the pure danger that comes from the religious fanaticism that Hamas, Hezbollah, and those other groups push. But yeah, no, I think we are in a transitional point in terms of the U.S. relationship with Israel. Where that goes, I don't know. I think there's still going to be fundamental support for Israel, but the people in America are rethinking the relationship, and where that goes is more difficult to predict than it's ever been, at least during my time in Congress.
And one of the things that I think is important to recognize as well is that desire to wipe Israel out and push it into the sea that sort of defined the early decades of Israel's existence. It still exists at these extremist edges of the Muslim Arab world in the Middle East. But at the heart of the Middle East is a set of leaders and states that want to normalize relations at this point.
Absolutely.
And so that is a massive sea change in Israel's relationship with its neighbors, and provides this incredible doorway of opportunity. Sometimes I just can't understand how it is that the leadership of Israel is choosing a path that continues to lead it away from this incredible opportunity when it has this other path right in front of it. But I think one of the defining things that can change the way that this all plays out is that there's this tremendous opportunity for normalization and integration.
Yeah. Two things about that. I'm trying to figure out which should go first here, so I'll just take a flyer and then figure it out which is the more important. Number one, yeah, it has changed a little bit in terms of who wants to get rid of Israel. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Jordan, Egypt have made peace with them a long time ago, and that leads to the opportunity that you're talking about, and more on that in just a moment. But it's worth noting that, I've been lobbied for, the entire time I've been in Congress by people who, were on the Palestinian side of the equation, for lack of a better way to put it. And consistently, their lobbying has been towards a one-state solution. Their vision being the right of return, that the Palestinians will return to what is now Israel. And a one-state solution means that Israel goes away. And they've argued, well, everybody should have equal rights, and, Israel shouldn't be allowed to control immigration into Israel, to have it just be Jews. And you can have fascinating different argument about, the pros and cons of that approach. But at the end of it, Israel doesn't exist anymore. All right. If they are outnumbered by their Arab, Muslim neighbors, they're gone. And so that explains to some degree Netanyahu's reluctance to fully embrace the opportunity that I'm going to talk about here in a moment. Yeah, it's Saudi Arabia and the UAE in particular who have really changed their tune for reasons I'll explain. But you still had Hezbollah hanging out up there north of Lebanon, getting ready to launch a bunch of rockets. You still had Iran supporting their, partners, their militias all across the Middle East with one and only one goal, and that was the destruction of Israel. So it was hard to fully embrace the positive without how do you deal with these people? Now that Hezbollah is weaker, Hamas is weaker, and Iran is weaker, then we can seize that opportunity. And that opportunity is primarily being driven by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And, a lot of people say, well, it's because they're concerned about Iran. And that's part of it. Israel is an enemy of Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, they're concerned about Iran as well as Bahrain. Believe it or not, Qatar is not in love with Iran either. That's a popular misconception out there. They've got their conflicts there. But more importantly, from my trips to the Middle East several times in the last few years, what MBS and MBZ want, they want to grow economically. That is their number one biggest goal. They woke up and said religious fanaticism is for somebody else. Oil's not going to last forever. They want to build a strong, powerful economy in their countries. And they know that the number one biggest impediment to that is the perceived and real instability in the Middle East. The fact that, okay, you want to do business there? Well, what's going to blow up next? What suicide bomber is going to show up? What war is going to kick off? What country's leader is going to be deposed, setting off a civil war? They want stability, and they see a partnership with Israel as a path to that stability. And that is the opportunity to be seized. Now, the problem is Netanyahu envisions all of those things happening with nobody paying any attention to the Palestinians. Just let that go. And Saudi Arabia, UAE, a whole bunch of other people made it clear, look, we want to make peace with you, wherever that, but not if you are going to annex the West Bank or Gaza, not if you're going to continue to force the Palestinians to live in depravity. Deprivation might be a better word there. You have to do something for the Palestinian people. And now that is the opportunity of this moment. And the question is, will Donald Trump stick to that? Because the U.S. is going to play an outsized influence here. Trump is really popular in Israel. If Trump says to Netanyahu, I'm not going to be with you next October if you don't do this, he'll respond. Next October is when, for the uninitiated, is when Netanyahu is up, when they have to hold another election at the latest. They might do it sooner. Will we exercise that leverage? And will there be some sort of future built for the Palestinian people? That's the opportunity. But Israel and the U.S. have to follow the lead of Saudi Arabia and the UAE and seize that opportunity.
Yeah, and I could jump in here, Congressman, just to say, I think that's exactly right. And it's very much the opportunity. Everything you're describing here is creating this moment of opportunity, whether it's the Arab states now who want to make peace, whether it's the fact that the U.S.-Israel relationship is being reshaped, and the best way to strengthen that and really solidify that again would be progress with the Palestinians. The fact that I think, look, I was working in the Biden administration and we were talking to the Saudis and the Israelis about this, and the Saudis always wanted something on the Palestinian issue, but I think what they want on the Palestinian issue and how important that is to them is very different now than it was before October 7th. They really see this now as so destabilizing, and you have the entire world. I don't think everything else is going back in terms of Europe and the relationship between Israel. All of that comes together to create this moment of choice for Israel, maybe next October or sooner, continue down this pathway or take a different path.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about the West Bank yet, but we
Sure.
should, because what's happening there, Gaza was what the focus, because tens of thousands of people were killed, and it was a brutal, brutal war. But what's going on in the West Bank now is the Palestinians there are struggling with increasingly aggressive settler advancements, and an Israeli government that increasingly either turns a blind eye or in some cases encourages that, which undermines Palestinian self-governance and just basically Palestinian opportunity. Something needs to change in terms of how Israel approaches the West Bank for this to ultimately work as well. Because what you'd like to see is you'd like to see one government between Gaza and the West Bank.
Yeah, I know, Congressman, I know you've been a real leader on this issue in particular with the West Bank Violence Prevention Act, that you've been one of the original sponsors of. Maybe tell us a little bit about that. I mean, J Street's we've been pushing pretty hard. I think J Street's crowd knows some about this, but interested to hear your thinking on this piece of legislation and why you decided to support it and bring it forward.
Well, it sanctions individuals that are engaged in expanding illegal settlements in the West Bank. It's a pressure point to try and stop that. And if the U.S. makes that, and it's not so much about, how it's going to impact those individuals. It will impact those individuals, will discourage them. But the statement that it would send if the United States, Israel's basically one and only friend left in the world at the moment, is making a strong statement against settler expansion in the West Bank. That is a major pressure point to get Israel to change their policies around that. That's the main impetus behind it.
Yeah, and I think, look, I worked again on some of these similar issues when I was back in government. I also think there's a difference maker piece of it where it also applies sanctions on entities that are supporting and underwriting this. And there's a lot of money and support going for these things that helps
Yeah.
move all this forward. And that makes, I think, a huge difference too. So thank you. We really appreciate your support and leadership on that issue in particular, one that we're still focused on. You can't really separate these issues.
I
And
guess go ahead, Jeremy. Sorry.
well, I was just going to pick up on that, and maybe you can extend your thoughts on this a little bit. The sanctions on settlers and some of the institutions that support them is one piece of it. But I wanted to go back to the question of our American support, whether it is the assistance we're providing or the sales we're allowing of arms to Israel. The question of whether or not it's enough to just go after the individual bad actors and some of the financial institutions that are supporting them, or if there needs to be a government lever of pressure to say that arms sales or future transfers are going to be conditioned on whether or not action is taken to either stop settler violence, enforce law, stop the settlements expansions. I'm curious if you see that as something that's likely to be a lingering change to the American-Israel relationship.
Well, I think it's possible. I think certainly the issue of conditioning aid to Israel is more on the table now in U.S. politics than it ever has been. Whether or not we get to the point where we do that, I don't know, but it's something that's being talked about by a much wider range of people than it used to be. And that is a leverage point. And I want to be clear here. I understand where Benjamin Netanyahu is coming from on this. I've met with him many, many times, going back over 20 years now. And I understand sort of his outlook. And that is Israel is threatened. They are threatened by those groups that I mentioned earlier. And the degree to which they give greater autonomy to the Palestinians in the West Bank or in Gaza, well, that's right next door. And if you are threatened by these groups, their proximity makes that threat greater. I get that. And I'm not saying that Israel, embracing the idea of creating greater autonomy for the Palestinian people in Gaza and in the West Bank is a risk-free step for Israel to take. It's not. But, given the neighborhood that they live in, given the fact that the Palestinians have a right to a life as well. I mean, I think we would have been better off 100 years ago or 90 years ago now if the Arabs and the Palestinians had said, okay, you can have your state. Here are the boundaries. We're going to have our state. That's fine. Instead, there's a great book called Palestine 1936 that did a brilliant job of summing up all the back and forth as, the Jews and the Arabs Jews and the Palestinians in that area were both trying to drive the British out. But the great debate was, okay, once the British leave, well, then what? And the Palestinians in the Arab world made a fateful decision. It was like, Jews, you can stay, but you can't run anything. And that kicked off a civil war in the mid 1930s, and that's really gone on, for 90 years since then. So I do get that, but does Israel really think that they can exist on the world stage without giving the Palestinians any rights? I think that's a risky move because yes, the US is the primary supporter, but Israel, they do business, in Europe and elsewhere, and that business is going away now because of Gaza. And if they go right back into an endless conflict, Israel's ability to, be part of, the world of nations here will be severely restricted. It'll impact their economy and a lot of other things. So I hope they make the right choice and take some risk to help build a future for the Palestinians.
Right. And I think one of the factors in determining whether or not one is pursuing the strategy that is going to make you safest is what's the alternative. So if the prime minister's argument is that he's afraid of allowing a Palestinian state to develop and sort of being a partner and helping it to develop over the coming years, the alternative is for the Palestinians to have no hope and no future. And that itself is a strategy that makes Israel insecure. And so you're actually measuring two strategies, and both of which have risks. And what I think we've seen over the last 2 years, and certainly over the last 2 decades, is that without a political resolution, without something that Palestinians are building and living for, the energy is going to be put into destruction, and it's going to be put into fighting and destroying the other side. And so I think there's a much greater security risk to Israel by continuing to build settlements, continuing to deny Palestinians a route out of all of this.
That is my view as well. And we'll see where it plays out. And again, sort of going back to where we started, I think the U.S. can play a very, very strong role in this. We are the number one patron of Israel to the tune of $4 billion plus an added little boost that we gave them just last year, given this conflict. We have leverage, but also I think the Israeli people, part of their identity is their connection to the United States of America. They would not be comfortable with the notion that that relationship was severed. And again, as critical as I can be of Donald Trump, he's got a unique influence here because of how popular he is in Israel to help nudge this in the right direction. And, I wish I was more confident that he would. He tends to have a short attention span, as you alluded to earlier. But, that's the hope going forward, is that leverage will be used to build a better future.
Yeah, and I want to make one last point on this and then pivot a little bit, which is also really since the Second Intifada for 20 years now, the Israeli approach has been to manage the conflict. We don't have a partner. We just have to do the best we can.
Yeah.
I really think that paradigm blew up on October 7th in all the worst ways possible. That's not what the Israeli public wants to go back to. It's not clear what they do want to go back to, but there's a moment here, and it could go one of two ways. It could go exactly the way we're talking about, or it could go very negative. It could go kind of what Netanyahu called about a month ago, super Sparta, where Israel goes in the opposite direction. All the other things you were talking about, Congressman, the negative consequences. So I really think that moment of decision is fundamentally coming for Israel.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah. Now I do want to shift us a little bit, Congressman, back home for a little bit. We can't let you go without at least asking you what your take is on the current government shutdown and the situation in Congress, and whether you have any hope of this resolving soon, or we might expect it to go in the weeks ahead?
Well, I think this is a vastly larger crisis than most people appreciate, because there's two sets of issues at play here. One is certainly the budget debate. Donald Trump, since he came into office, has put in place one of the most partisan budgets we've ever seen. In terms of funding Republican priorities and not funding Democratic priorities, gutting healthcare, gutting food security, doing massive tax cuts, spending more money on defense and homeland security, canceling programs in Democratic areas all across the country for energy projects, transportation projects. So, Democrats now being in a position where the Republicans need our votes to continue that budget are rightfully saying, we're not going to just vote for your budget. If you need our votes, let's negotiate. Let's talk about how to change that. What that looks like, we'll see. That's a piece of it. That is relatively normal, even if a little, extreme because of the way Trump is budgeted. But the other thing is, Trump is shredding our Constitution on a day in and day out basis as we sit here, in an incredibly authoritarian way. Congress is supposed to have the right to appropriate money. Trump has said, no, I'll appropriate it wherever I want. Now he's saying he's only done it since the shutdown, but he did it before the shutdown. He canceled, spending projects. He froze funds. He fired federal employees. He's taken a very extreme position. He's using his Justice Department to aggressively target and persecute his enemies while pardoning his friends, no matter what crimes they commit. He's using the FCC to pressure media outlets into, only doing the coverage that he wants. The Department of Defense has just kicked the media out if the media won't promise to clear their stories with the Pentagon before they write them. I mean, that's authoritarianism, all right? And right now, Mike Johnson is going along and effectively dissolving the United States House of Representatives. I've been through shutdowns before. The House never shut down, okay? We were always in session. There's no reason we can't be in session just because the government isn't funded. In fact, there's every reason why we should be in session, because we should be resolving that crisis. And it appears that they are going to turn us into sort of a constitutional monarchy instead of a constitutional republic. We've got Kristi Noem, doing messages in the airport, blaming Democrats for everything, using the United States government to push their Republican Party message. They're doing that all over the place. He is turning the United States government into his personal power center. And that is making us, I don't think right now in this moment, we can say we're a constitutional republic, because he's doing what he wants to do and the courts are allowing him to get away with it. And as far as whether there's any end in sight, I don't see it at the moment, because the Republicans are refusing to negotiate, continuing basically to say to Democrats, you have to vote for our budget and we won't give you any protections. And one final point on this, let's say we vote for that. He's already made it clear that he won't follow it. He will spend the money where he wants to spend it and not spend it where he doesn't want to spend it, regardless of what we say. So we cut a deal and then he just rewrites the deal on his own. These are very serious issues that I think the American people should be taking more seriously than they are, all tied into the fact that healthcare premiums are about to go through the ceiling for millions of people in this country, and not just the ones on the Affordable Care Act, because millions of people will be driven off of health insurance, which means you will have more and more what they call uncompensated care, which basically means people who are showing up, getting health care, but they can't pay for it. So who does pay that bill? Well, healthcare providers will shift the burden over to all those of us who do have insurance. So it affects everybody. So it's pretty serious. And no, I don't see in the short term a resolution.
Well, I think the question of how do you get the American people's attention around this is really key. I think that the choice that your caucus has made and the leadership has made to focus it in on healthcare is the right choice.
Yes.
It brings it home to people in a pocketbook way, something that is the most vital aspect of being able to make ends meet as a working family in this country. So I think the fight that has been picked is the right fight. I tend to agree with you that unfortunately I don't see this ending anytime soon. Well, Congressman, I just want to say thank you. I know we are often bringing folks into your office to brief you on a lot of these different issues, and I will tell you that we tell those people we bring in to expect a very tough grilling. You always have very good questions, and you are, exceedingly thoughtful and kicking the tires and checking things from every angle. I hope that we have also now returned the favor and asked you some good questions and brought a good dialogue to the table with you today, and look forward to the continued conversation. I think Elon may even be coming in tomorrow to see you, so take it easy on him. And thank you very, very much for joining us for this conversation. Elon and I are going to stick around for a couple of minutes and just chat about recent developments, but I really appreciate your taking the time to join us on Word on the Street Live.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for giving me the chance.
All right. Take care. Oh, well, that was great conversation, Jeremy, and really interesting, I thought, to hear his takes, specifically on the fact that we're not going back to the old thinking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the old thinking about the U.S.-Israel relationship. I think there's a lot of folks who want to just settle in and go, essentially back to where we were October 6th, 2023, if we could. Oh, none of this is complicated, but that's just not happening. And it was very clear talking to the congressman who, as a chair or ranking member of Armed Services Committee, is in one of the most important positions to understand this and one of the best briefed members of Congress on these issues. And so I thought that was a real interesting early litmus test because we hadn't had a real chance to talk to him before. And to me, it says we're going to be looking at a new normal when this is done.
Right. And it was really good that he brought in the West Bank. I mean, I think that there's obviously so much focus on Gaza because that's where all of the eyes of the world have been over the course of the last 2 years. And we're focused on, is the ceasefire being implemented? What are the next steps? What's happening in Gaza? But as we are having all these conversations, uh, you know, I used to call it creeping annexation, but, the galloping annexation of the West Bank in real time is just going ahead at full speed. And it's really good to know that he is focused on that. And I know J Street is going to be focused on that, but it's not been as much a part of the conversation as it needs to be.
Yeah, well, and one of the things I am worried about, and you've heard this, you've seen this happen before. What did Netanyahu promise Smotrich and Ben Gvir to stay in the government with this deal? It's clearly not all out annexation because Trump was very clear with the Arab states, and if Israel went in that direction, I think you would destabilize the entire agreement. But what we don't see and what happens quietly every day, and I imagine one of the things he said to Smotrich and Ben Gvir, especially Smotrich, who's really driving this in the West Bank, is you can do whatever you want. You already are. Keep doing it. Feel free to move further. And especially with the world so focused on Gaza, that's definitely something we're going to have to keep watching. And unfortunately, as you and I have seen in recent trips to the region, we have another J Street delegation going out soon. That stuff's only going to get worse or stay as bad as it's been. And the deal of the last week, as great as it is, does nothing to address that. I do want to pip us. I do want to go take us back to Gaza because one of the things, Jeremy, that's just been driving me crazy a little bit for the past few days, and I know you and I are. We try to project a little more optimism here at J Street, and justifiably so. But all the conventional wisdom is nothing is happening now. We got this ceasefire. Everything's going to go back to how it was or worse. That seems to be the smart, safe bet, but I wonder what you make of that smart, safe bet. It's obviously the safe thing to say.
Yeah, look, I think that it really will depend on whether or not this Trump team stays focused and engaged. I do give credit to Witkoff over the course of these months for learning the issue, getting engaged, building bridges. People who have met with him say that he is very serious and focused on the right things. And so, is he going to stay involved? Are they going to have a team of people that is really going to do the day in and day out tough work? Take the security force training. There have been security forces being trained in Egypt. Are they ready to deploy them? Who's going to back them up? Do they have a UN resolution that they're drafting that they are going to introduce to give this some form of mandate? Do they have any idea of the names of the people who are going to be named to be the transitional authority? I understand that they do have lists of people. So if they have the security forces trained, if they give them the regional backing and international mandate, if they put this governance into place in a matter of days and weeks, not in a matter of months and years, but move quickly, like Tom Friedman said this morning, I don't rule out that that could happen. But boy, are they going to have to devote the time, energy, and focus that this administration doesn't have a track record of proving they're ready to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this before. As somebody who's both of us have served in government, the nitnoiding details that are so brutal and so hard to actually take care of, that's what you need now that we're through the worst of the immediate conflict. And that is not exactly what the Trump administration specializes in. I do think things are a little bit differently, just in that we can see some progress in the next few months, but I think everything is going to be kicking and screaming with Trump pressuring him, and you're only going to go so far. The real pivot moment is coming with this election. I
Right.
think this plan is a multi-year plan, and there's a moment coming next year for Israel, no later than October, November of next year. I think more likely over the summer. Who knows? Maybe even earlier. Once the Knesset comes back in and politics really restart in Israel, let's see what the dynamics are. But I don't think they're passing a budget in March, which means election in June. That's probably the latest in my sense. And that's really the choice. That's the choice for Israelis at that key moment. Not that this new Israeli government, which would be kind of a center-right combination of parties, it won't be jumping exactly where J Street wants it to jump on day one. But in a world and all the things we talked about with Congressman Smith and how things are changing, how Israel is facing a new world, how just going back to the old paradigm, it's not really an option. You can either make things worse or make things better. That moment is coming. So I'm willing to be patient for the next 6 months with fitful progress. I just, no matter how great Donald Trump is and how determined his people are, and I have questions about both of those things, you're only going to move Bibi Netanyahu so much. Uh, but, if we get a different government, if we get a government that really wants to start going in the right direction and sees the opportunity and also the threats, the real threats Israel now faces in terms of its international standing in the U.S.-Israel relationship, then I think there's a pathway there that there wasn't before October 7th.
And I do think that there's been a lot of analysis of things in sort of two phases, that there were the immediate things that needed to get done, and then you jump to the long-term solution. And I think that for me, I'm thinking there's more in three phases, that there's the immediate stuff that just is basically getting done right now, right? The releases and the trucks starting to flow and whatever the monitoring is going to be of the violations that are taking place. There's this immediate phase, get that done. And then there are a series of steps, and whether it's from now to June or now to October or now to the following January, you've got to have some sort of stabilization force in there. I mean, that just has to happen. It's not a long-term solution, but something else has to go in there. And there has to be some beginning of a governance administration. It's a temporary transitional authority, but some other authority is going to have to be in charge for the next 6, 12, 15 months, other than the current Hamas authority. And they've indicated they're willing to turn over administrative power to that. So there are things to happen in a second phase that don't require the kind of big picture existential choice from the Israeli people and the Israeli government about the future of the land between the river and the sea, and is there going to be a second state over the next generation or not? That's over the horizon in a third phase. So I sort of think of it in three pieces rather than two. And I think the key is, will the Trump team really get that second piece done and build the bridge from now to the election?
Yeah, and that second piece, I do think we need to set our expectations and be realistic about that second piece too, in that it does require a lot of Israeli cooperation. If you want to start doing real rebuilding, you need real things to come in, right? If you want international force coming in, is Israel going to nitnoid over every weapon that they get? If you want real Palestinian training from the beginning, that international force is going to have to work with Palestinians. Are those
Right.
Palestinians going to be allowed to have any weapons? What kind of weapons? What kind of bullets? Bibi is capable with this government of getting you stuck in a million different morasses. And Trump is going to only be able to make so much progress, even if they put all this energy to it. It's going to all be kicking and screaming. So my own take is, you're right. This phase two is frankly going to be pretty weak and mediocre as long as it's under Netanyahu. But you get some basics done and you keep moving in the right direction. And then you get to phase three. In phase two, also, the question is any reversal at all in the West Bank? And I think the answer is no. We're not going to see any of that, unfortunately. And so a new Israeli government is really going to have to come in and reverse a whole bunch of things there, especially settler violence and some of the most extreme stuff. So it's going to be ugly. It's going to be messy. I'm just not willing to blow it all off and say it's not going to work, because the one thing that gives me some confidence is we're not going back to October 6th. Things are different. And so we're going to have to figure out what this new way forward is. And, if the Israeli public chooses to elect Netanyahu again, I think we all know where that's going to go. Just make everything much worse. But if not, I think there's space for new things.
Yeah, and I just can't, given the level of anger, and it continues right through the deal. I mean, it's not as if the deal reversed Netanyahu's political fortunes. 400,000 people last Saturday night heard his name and started booing, right? I mean, he is just not going to be able to get past the level of anger that exists in a very large segment of the Israeli public over responsibility for what led up to October 7th, responsibility for trying to take apart Israel's democracy and then responsibility for all the failures of the war. And so for all of those, I see no path out for him. I remain optimistic that at the end of the day, when there is a next Israeli government, he will not be a part of it.
Yeah, 100%. I think accountability for October 7th is still number one on the Israeli public's mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
All right. Well, that I think brings us to the end of today's discussion. We've got Saturday, big day is the No King's Day marches. I just want to bring that to everybody's attention. I know people are aware of them, and J Street is going to be in at least a dozen cities, probably more, putting together some groups. So go to our website, find out where we're meeting, join us to march with a group from the J Street community if you're interested. But our fight for American democracy. It's a very, very closely tied to our fight for the values and the principles we care about when it comes to Israel. These are common values and common threats across both societies and around the world. And so we'll be out there on Saturday marching for American democracy. I hope to see you out there, Elon.
yeah, I probably won't be, to be honest with you, Jeremy, but I want our people to be out there. I owe my wife a Saturday at home, but
Nice, nice, good. Well, peace at home is as important as peace abroad. So I support that 100%. So thanks everybody for joining us at Word on the Street Live, and we will see you again next week, Wednesday at 4 p.m.
Take care, everybody.